Right, looks like we're underway, and I can see a couple of attendees joining, so great. Looks like it's all working hunky-dory. Always got to double check when it comes to the tech. Brilliant. Well, hi everyone, and thank you for joining us on this IBC focused webinar today. My name is Declan Bradshaw, and I'm an Associate Director here at Babel. We're a B2B focused technology, PR and content marketing agency, and we've been representing brands at IBC all the way back to when we started in 2006. I'm going to be the moderator for the session today, but you're not here to hear from me, you're here to hear from our expert panel. So allow me to quickly introduce them, and then we'll get underway. Starting with Jenny Priestley. Jenny is the editor of TVB Europe, one of the most prominent media titles in the industry. Jenny's been editor there since early 2017, and if you follow TVB Europe's coverage or Jenny on social, you'll know that she's regularly breaking exclusive stories and interviewing the biggest names in the sector, so certainly knows her stuff when it comes to IBC and the biggest trends. Next, we have Paolo Pescatori, who one of the most recognizable faces in the TMT sector. Paolo's amassed over 2 decades worth of experience. You wouldn't believe it with his young face, but he has. As an analyst, working at the likes of Omdia, IDC, CCS Insights, and it's now branched out to his own consultancy, PP Foresight, which he started in 2018. Again, Paolo, a regular at all the biggest industry events, actually joining us today from Dubai, where he's been covering telecoms world, Middle East. So never seems to not be at a big trade show, certainly knows his way around the show floor. And if you've read anything about the sector in the news, you've probably seen his analysis or a quote from Paolo. So great to have you with us. And lastly, Jake Bickerton, the editorial director of both Broadcast Tech and Broadcast Sport, as well as the co-creator of the brand's Tech Innovation Awards. Jake oversees both brands' quarterly print titles, which are really well put, Jake, I have to say. Nice to have a really glossy print magazine. And of course, still publishes stories for online as well. Jake's used his extensive experience as a journalist and contacts in the industry to build Broadcast and its events into some of the biggest and best in the sector. So thanks all for joining us, and hopefully our attendees find the session useful. It is going to be recorded, so you can catch up on demand. We're going to get straight into about 45 minutes worth of questions with our panel here, but we will have time at the end for audience Q&A. The Q&A function is open now. If you want to submit questions throughout based on anything that you hear, we'll come to them at the end. And of course, you can submit them anonymously if you like. But I actually want to start the session with a quick poll of our audience, just about news timelines and thinking about when, as a brand, you put out your news for IBC. Now, we've made this poll single choice. So if you are one of those businesses that puts out plenty of news at IBC, I want you to think about what you would deem to be your biggest news story and when you would time that for the show. So either during IBC itself, over that weekend, in the week of IBC leading up to, so the Monday to Thursday of the show, or slightly before, slightly after. So we'll just give you a little bit of time to answer that poll, and then we'll share the results and discuss with our panelists about how that kind of lines up to their experience and the chaos of their inboxes when it comes to Amsterdam in September. Looks like a few people are just still making their choice. Okay. We'll end that one there, and I'll just share the results with you all. So it looks like nobody has said that they put their news out during IBC. Now, Jenny, does that really live up to your experience? You might have a few fibers on the line.
No. So there are 2 things I would say about this. So right from about the beginning of July, Jake, and I'm sure Paolo and I start getting this is what we're showing at IBC emails, which at TVB Europe, we do actually post on our website, and we include them in our newsletter because we know that's of interest to our readers. Then when we get into very late August, running up to the show, and of course this year's show is a week later than normal, that's when we're making a really big announcement at the show, or we're debuting this brand new piece of technology that we've not told you about before. So there are 2, I would say there are 2 classifications of emails. Definitely we get emails when we're out on the show floor. We get them, that basically from the 1st of September, it really becomes a deluge. And quite often I will be doing briefings all day, get to look at my email, see something really big that I would have loved to included in our newsletter for that day, because at TVB Europe, as you know, we do newsletters every day and we do them all over the weekend during the show as well. But because I've been out all day, I've completely missed it and I've got to try and get it up for the next one. So from my point of view, I would always say, if you've got a really big announcement, send me an NDA, tell me about it early, and I'll get it, I can get it into the day that you're announcing it. I can make sure it's on our website. Otherwise, it has to wait a couple of days, or sometimes even till after the show because of how busy it is for all of us.
For sure, yeah.
The challenge is, and to Jenny's point there about big, every company feels like they've got a big story and a big story they want to share, where in reality, in the context of the market or the sector, depending on who's covering it and how we're covering it, it may not be as big as the vendor, the exhibitor, the company would like it to be. So, and I think it's a very good point that Jenny raised there. And we probably, as an industry, when we look at specifically media and broadcast, don't really do a good enough job of communicating before the event. And equally, just because the event is over, doesn't mean you can't continue the conversation after the event as well. And I know that Jenny and Jake particularly, they obviously cover the event quite differently to we typically as analysts would do. And they would do, a wrap-up show or things that, that were missed in previous articles. So I think it's, the whole exercise needs to be looked at very carefully, pre, during and post. And I think there's not enough weighting given to pre and post. And I think for the reasons that Jenny has outlined, and, I often see Jenny and Jake running around, with notes, sitting down in the meetings back to back, or with camera crews, with phones or what have you. And, from one place to another, it's impossible to keep on top of absolutely everything.
For sure. Jake, does that kind of ring true with sort of your experience and, maybe recommending people looking at after the show as like a window where there might not be as much news to actually kind of maximize the impact?
Yeah, I mean, we tend to do a preview piece for both NAB and IBC and magazines that we take over to the show. As you mentioned, I look after two brands, Broadcast Tech and Broadcast Sport. So we have quite a wide range of stories we could cover in that space. And what we tend to find is when we're doing the previews, they're done fairly early because of our print deadlines. But if you contact companies at that point, actually often they don't really know what their kind of key focus will be. So it's quite difficult with those previews. So I would suggest actually getting that information sorted out much earlier. So if journalists who've got print magazines are writing previews quite early, we have staggered deadlines at broadcast, and the titles that I look after tend to have quite early deadlines, even if they're not printing until the end of the month, because we have other magazines that are more news-based, and slightly tighter to the
IBC being sort of middle of September, what would you say is the best time to get in touch with you then to meet the print deadlines for
the preview stuff? I mean, we'll literally be writing that in sort of towards the end of July, so over a month before the show. And it seems quite early, but it's just the way it works for the way that we have to get stuff to print internally. So there's that. And then during the show, I agree actually with what's been said so far. If it's a proper
do you
thing,
really, Jake?
I do, Paolo.
Good.
You know me, I always agree with you. And if there's genuinely big story, that actually you can appreciate, the industry will find a big story too. I think it's essential to let us all know in advance so we can find a way of communicating that story in advance, or into our online system, so that it's primed and ready to go, because we'll be, as Jenny and Paolo have both mentioned, very busy with meetings at the show. So it's not like we can get to our email and pause and write anything up, because we've got lots of meetings scheduled. And then after the show, I think actually that's a really good idea. Did you miss this piece of news? It's actually genuinely interesting, and this is why. We can still cover it as an IBC related thing for at least maybe up to a week after. So that's quite a good window actually of opportunity there.
Declan, it's probably worth just adding to what Jake was saying. It is interesting that some companies will not be in a position to make an announcement or give us a heads up beforehand because of the sign-off process needed, depending on the very nature of the deal. And so, you know, they are caught in this, you know, catch-22 situation that they feel like they've got to get something out of IBC for all the reasons that we've discussed. Standing out above all of the noise at IBC is not probably the right time to be doing it. So, you know, perhaps, you know, you can allude to it, catch up with us individually or or as a group, again, schedules permitting at the show, to give us a heads up, but probably make a bigger splash after the event. But I do realize in some cases it's very difficult to get the sign off depending on the number of stakeholders involved in that process.
Definitely. And I guess, you know, thinking about getting the best timing is one thing, but there's inevitably going to be a lot of noise, lots of different companies competing for your attention. How do all three of you, maybe starting with you, Jake, prefer to be pitched? And I appreciate it probably depends on your relationship with that company or the PR company, but are you more email, more phone, social media? How do you prefer businesses to kind of reach out to you?
Yeah, I'm definitely more email. Yeah, if you send me an email, you know, we'll look at it, but we get so many that they do get deleted very quickly. So you have to get your key message over very quickly and don't, you know, bury it amongst a load of jargon that you think sounds impressive. It just doesn't. It's get to the point. Why is it important? I might not even understand the technology particularly. So really get across, you know, the elevator pitch straight away. If it doesn't sound like it's that important, sorry, I'll just get deleted. And also for broadcast, we cover kind of technology. We call it technology that's used for a creative purpose. So we're not sort of nuts and bolts stuff. It's got to be something that's going to impact the creative role, maybe in post-production, so sort of grading, visual effects, editing, that sort of stuff. And in production, anything, you know, camera related stuff that you can kind of tangibly say that's going to impact on the creative process tends to be the stuff we write about. Not completely exclusively, but on the whole, it's that. So some stuff will work for us, some won't. And so we have to be quite brutal about what we delete and what we take on, just because it's quite a small team and we get a lot of emails. But emails, I'd say, phone calls, they just annoy me because we're so busy, unless it's really important. And, you know, it's a really big company that's releasing something massively significant, then I would say email. And then if you haven't heard from us and it is a significant thing, do follow it up, just in case we haven't quite understood why that's significant enough to pay attention to.
Be confident it is significant first, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And Jenny, how about you in terms of sort of email, phone, social? What's your sort of preference?
Always email to begin with, and then if you haven't heard back from me, maybe follow up with a phone call. But I will always respond to you if it's something that I think is of interest to TVB Europe's readers. We're slightly different to Broadcast Tech. So Broadcast Tech, as Jake said, it's what impacts the creative side of the industry. For TVB Europe, we go glass to glass, from the camera through to when it gets on your screen. So we'll cover all areas. But some of those areas, like Jake said, are really technical, and I don't have that background. So if you're sending me a release that's got so many different things about the technology in there that I don't understand, and therefore I can't explain that to my readers, then unfortunately it gets deleted. The great thing, I think, any release I get that has a couple of lines as to why this is important for the broadcast industry, or the media tech industry, that really helps me, because then I can go, oh yeah, that's definitely, I know that I don't know, all the camera people are going to be interested in that new camera, or all the guys working in visual effects are going to be interested, or oh wow, that company's bought that company, that's definitely going to be of interest to the readers. That's what I really look forward for. Like Jake said, we get utterly bombarded by emails. So please, if I've not come back to you, it's not that I'm completely ignoring you, it's that either I'm so snowed under I can't get back to you, or I felt, well, actually, I'm not quite sure that's right for our readership. And I would say, and I suspect Jake might agree with me with this, please look at the website. If you're a brand new PR that we haven't worked with before, please look at the website first about the areas that we cover before sending something, because again, we get so many emails that aren't relevant to us, and that just gets deleted, or if it doesn't grab me, it's gone. So yeah, always email first, and then I'll come back to you as quickly as I can if I'm interested. Which sounds really horrible. Sorry, everybody.
No problem at all. Ultimately,
I think you're being really diplomatic, Jenny, based on our previous conversations on this, and like.
Thanks, Paolo.
Paolo,
you're trying to tell everyone that I'm like. I don't know.
But I was hoping Jake was going to interrupt and disagree, but
no. Just be polite. Well, am I?
Of course, Paolo, you're a slightly different remit, as an analyst. Hopefully, businesses out there are pitching you as an analyst rather than kind of bundling you in with journalists. I'm sure it does happen, but you're very much building a brand for yourself on LinkedIn as a platform. How do you prefer? Do you prefer people to connect with you and engage with you on LinkedIn, or still sort of email, phone, or what's your sort of preference? And I guess also for you as an analyst, what type of news are you particularly looking to cover when it comes to a big show? Because I imagine there's a lot of it that you just want to park to one side.
Yeah, I could probably steal the show now for the next hour and just speak for analysts, and I'm just conscious for everyone. There's a lot of what Jake and Jenny have said that's extremely relevant in the context of the way analysts broadly cover events. We don't want to be bombarded, but the very nature is that we actually are. I think Jenny raises a good point. There needs to be specific targeting of the various areas that we cover. I'm conscious of the fact that I'm looking broad and I'm looking top level, and given my background, there is some technical expertise that I do look at, but I don't cover the end-to-end spectrum, so I'm not necessarily interested in the cameras per se, but hence why I think a lot of due diligence needs to be done to try to have a specific list of analysts and journos that are covering the specific areas. I in the first instance, coming back to your question, the way that I would like to be targeted, again, what they've already said in terms of email, but I do get bombarded from the same company, the same PR firm repeatedly, and it drives me absolutely bananas. And I'll just delete the email. I refuse to see the company. I refuse to dialogue, and I'll have my own agenda at the show, and you've basically lost me. And which is a shame, because you might be doing some good things, and I probably need to be covering the event per se. I'm just shocked, to be honest with you, that the volume of traffic that's generated either at NAB or IBC is almost on par to Mobile World Congress. And at Mobile World Congress, there are, loads of companies, which really, really surprises me. And so I think, it needs to be a lot more targeted in nature to how we do it. And of course, the role of the analyst is completely different to the way the journalists will cover it. And I know there will be some analysts who will want to have back-to-back meetings and and effectively be brainwashed by that vendor, and then maybe given their own agenda, if it's their own agenda or the company's agenda, write a specific report on that. For me, obviously, if I spend half an hour with every single company, which would be very easy to do, it's very counterproductive of my time, because effectively I need to think about the commercial aspect, as you rightly pointed out, Declan, and to hear a 25-minute pitch that perhaps hasn't been really thought through or considered, and then the last 5 or 10 minutes is picking my brains. Well, quite frankly, I'm not going to sign up for that. But the very nature of what I do look for something that really stands out from a show. Typically, as analysts, we always get asked, what's the biggest thing that you've seen? What's the thing that's really caught your eye? Which company, maybe has got the best, the booth, stand, etc. So we'll look around the show floor, and then try and do a little write-up piece based on what we've seen, or look at where the state of the market is, or where do we think that the market is going, and try and leverage the work that Jenny and Jake do and the relationships they have with companies, effectively reporting on the key news and stories from the show.
Brilliant. And you actually read my mind, Paolo, by mentioning briefings there at the show, because that takes us into, I guess, the next portion of our webinar, and moving on from kind of the news that you're being pitched and the stories to that experience of being out on the show floor, and how much of your diary you give up and what you kind of want to take from those briefings. And that takes us to our second poll. I want to ask our attendees about the spokespeople that they offer up to media and analysts. This one is multiple choice, unlike the last one, so you can take a few options. But just curious to know from our attendees today, which type of spokespeople do you typically put forward for media and analyst? Are you putting up the CEO, the C-suite, the founder? Are you letting the product marketing guys handle that because they kind of know the products inside and out? Is it the comms team? Is it a mix? Just interesting to see kind of what our attendees today make of that. And then we'll discuss, I guess, what you guys are looking for and the types of briefings that go well and maybe the ones that don't as well. So we'll just give everyone a couple of seconds to answer that. Looking like a bit of a varied response, which is good. Cool. Okay. We'll just share the results of this one. Again, a bit of a mix, but certainly leading towards those more senior roles. Does that, you've made a face there, Jenny, does that sort of mirror up to your experience? Are you being pitched CEOs all the time, or maybe that doesn't line up?
To be honest, quite often you turn up and you don't even know who you're going to speak to because the PR doesn't tell you. So that's my experience. So I don't know if we're going to talk about this, but I don't like doing interviews on the show floor because I've been doing back-to-back meetings from 9 o'clock and it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon and my brain is now completely scrambled. And I've been so busy running up to the show that I've probably not had time to properly sit down and think about what I might want to speak to this person about. And they're busy as well. They're being pulled off because suddenly a customer's come up and somebody wants them to talk to them or whatever. So for me, when I'm at the show, I do briefings and I tend to do completely back-to-back briefings throughout the whole of the show. Every half hour I'll be seeing somebody, which is a lot. What I love about going to shows is seeing that piece of technology that people have been telling me about, I've been getting releases about, or I've done interviews about. We actually get to see it, whether that be hardware or software. And I don't know if Jake and Paolo agree with me on this, but I felt at NAB there was a definite move now, lots more software. There's a lot more when you rock up to a booth or whatever, there's a lot more screens there these days than there are actual things to press buttons of and things like that. I don't know if you agree, but yeah, for me, I really like seeing something actually being used while that I can actually physically see, obviously, while I'm there. And I've gone kind of I've lost my thread already, which is very typical of me, but that for me, that's what briefings are. And then so I'll see what the vendor has to show me, and then we'll talk about why that's important, and then we'll talk about what they've got going on, and then we'll talk about what I've got going on, and then opportunities where we can work together. That's how I use shows.
Okay, so if it's maybe seeing, like you said, seeing the tech live and in color, would you rather actually deal with maybe some of the product marketing people, kind of the heads of, like actually involved in the day-to-day product rather than the C-suite? What would kind of
I'm happy to do either or. As I said, I usually turn up and I'm not quite sure who I'm seeing. It's occasionally I'll have you're going to see so and so. I turned up to one of the industry's biggest vendors at IBC last year and was told, oh no, the CEO's coming to see you because he knows you. Like, oh, okay. I wasn't expecting that, that kind of thing, which is lovely. But excuse me. I'm happy really I'm happy to talk to a product person. I'm happy to talk to a CEO if they know the product. I'm happy to talk to a head of marketing even, because they often know the products as well. So really, I don't mind who I talk to as long as they can tell me what the product's about, and we can talk about how that's important and opportunities to how I can cover that with them and how they can help support me with that as well.
For sure. And how about you, Jake? Does, some publications have a very sort of strict policy. What's broadcast like in terms of the spokespeople that you're sort of happy to engage with, and then what would be your preference in terms of what you think is the most valuable for you when you're out there?
Yeah, I mean, generally, C-suite is good for stories, but at trade shows, I agree with Jenny, I think it's more about who actually understands the relevance and the market positioning of whatever product is their focus, or service or software they're focusing on at the show. So, if you've got someone at a top level in the company, but they don't really understand what the new bit of kit does or why it's different, it's less useful for us who are just trying to go around lots and lots of different meetings, scribbling lots of notes or recording lots of stuff. And you really just want to get to the crux of, what is it? Why is it important? When's it going to be available? Who do you expect is going to buy it? What does it mean in the context of trends at the show, those kind of things. And then, as Jenny says, a lot of it isn't just a one-way street of taking information from these people. You're also disseminating information back to them about what you're doing. We run a lot of conferences. We've got some big awards that we've created. And, it's about making sure the industry also understands what we do, what events we've got coming up, why they should enter things like the Broadcast Sport Awards or Broadcast Tech Innovation Awards. And so it's a kind of two-way street, relationship building part of it as well. And it's a lot to cram into essentially 15-20 minutes at the most, because if you're doing these every half an hour meetings that Jenny talked about, which we all do, often you're it's a classic, isn't it? Right at the end of one hall, and you've got to be right at the other end of the hall.
Skates on,
5 million
Please
miles
be
away.
aware when you're booking us that
That's
if
a
you
good
want
point.
us to see all your clients and they're all in different halls, that's not going to happen. You kind of need to, I get a lot of people who will come to me. I'm sure, again, we'll talk about this in a minute, but come to me very close to the show and say, can you come and see this client, this client, this client, and this client? And I'll go and look at where they are and say, no, I haven't got time to be. I can't run from hall 14 to hall 2 to hall 7. And let's be honest, the show in Amsterdam isn't always, although you kind of know where
there's no logic to where
there's no logic, there's no signage as to where hall 5 stand 27B is that way and 27F is that way, and you've just rocked up and you've got no idea where 27A or F is. That's the thing for all shows, all trade shows. Please remember the people that run around your trade shows. Please put in better signage. That is my biggest bugbear about all trade shows. Or if vendors, if you've got quite a lot of trade shows, they have they put the numbers down on the show floor, and then people stand on them, so you can't see them either. So please, so that's another thing to be wary of. Please make it easiest for us to find your stands. I know it's got your name on it, but if I'm in the middle of hall 5 and I'm trying to find whoever, it's not easy.
Well, we're live tweeting the webinar on the Babel PR Twitter, so maybe we can tag IBC with just better signage in all caps. Hopefully that will fix the problem.
I think also that what Jenny said about you go to a meeting and they don't actually, sometimes they don't know who you are, and fairly regularly they don't know who you should be speaking to. And okay, the onus is on us to try and arrange that in advance, but with so many meetings, you sometimes think, oh shit, no, sorry, oh dear, I forgot to find out who I should be talking to. And so it should be these people are booking lots of meetings with lots of different publications. It shouldn't be particularly difficult to say, okay, you're meeting whoever, and then then when you rock up, they should kind of know that you're there. Half the time you're going, especially in NAB, oh yeah, because they don't know our publication, so oh yeah, I'm from Broadcast Sport, Broadcast Tech, whatever. They sort of look blank at you. I've got a meeting, I'm not sure who it's with. All right, okay. And then you sort of hanging around, and then eventually you might bump into the PR finally, and it's like, oh phew, okay, great, we can get this done. Sometimes you just have to leave, it can be as bad as that, and then you get into trouble for not rocking up for the meeting. It's like, well, I was there and no one seemed to know anything about it. So yeah, just a brief point to echo what Jenny said, really.
I'm just going to echo that as well, and also add, as a woman at a trade show, a female journalist, one of the very few female journalists, I have walked up to do interviews and had people literally turn their back on me, to do meetings and literally turn their back on me because I'm a woman and I don't look that I should be spoken to.
Wow.
Which is, I have quite a tough skin, but that's not very nice when you walk up and I'm all smiley and hi, I'm here, and they will literally turn their back and just go off and do something else and ignore me, and that doesn't necessarily make me want to go and talk to them.
Oh, absolutely. And it sounds like, from what you've been saying, Jenny, Jake, and actually Paolo yourself, when you mentioned about kind of, supposed to be going into that big sales pitch, a basic level of respect, obviously, but it sounds like, maybe businesses aren't appreciating that this is a two-way street. Jake, you mentioned kind of the events and awards. Jenny, again, I know TVB Europe will have kind of sponsored packages. Paolo, you obviously looking to build relationships for your analysis. How much do you feel businesses kind of don't appreciate that two-way street and just want to kind of talk at you?
Well, I think there's a disconnect there, Declan. You've heard from Jenny, you've heard from Jake. One question, it's fine setting up that meeting, but whoever is setting up that meeting needs to communicate to both parties the objective of that meeting. And that introduction should already have been forged beforehand, whether that's on email or whether that's over the phone. And it feels like there's a quest or a drive just to get bum on seats, just to hit a quota, not realizing the actual tangible benefits and the damage to that relationship. I just wanted to throw, I don't want to digress, but just a continuation of the previous question. The other thing to consider as well is that when you go to an event, there's not just the show floor. There's also the events that happen during the event itself, whether it's before the show floor opens or after the event during the evening. So that is also another aspect to take into account as well for planning, but also as well, I'm starting to find when I look at these shows and, to a point that Jenny made, I walked around NAB this year and I saw an industry that's in flux, really struggling, some exhibitors cutting back on floor space. And it felt like there really isn't much innovation because of the challenges everyone is finding themselves in through economic and reasons and so forth. So I'm starting to spend a bit more of my own time at the show, going to the conference sessions, actually hearing some of those debates to help formulate an opinion around the show as well, beyond just the show floor. And, I worry a little bit for IBC, and we can talk about that later on. But I just wanted to, in the context of what Jenny and Jake were talking about, and, there's more to a show than just the show floor per se. And I think it's important to consider that, the organisers do put a lot of effort in the conference, in the agenda, and trying to attract a good quality of speakers as well. So I think, as a company, you probably need to think about, okay, well, from a conference perspective, what's my objective there? And it's probably, you would expect to see more senior people represented during those conference sessions, where perhaps on the show floor, there should be perhaps more focus towards a VP level or product marketeer, because of the very notion of trying to sell network kit. But of course, they have to bear in mind when they're talking to folks like Jenny, Jake, myself, and of course other analysts, there has to be, of course, I understand the sales pitch, but treat us, you don't need to sell us. We're not going to buy your kit. You're expecting us to give you free PR. So treat us with a bit more respect, and I think there's a complete disconnect. And I think, we need to take, almost those 3 steps back. And what is the real objective? Because, Jenny just talked about some of her terrible experiences, and so have Jake. We shouldn't be in that position where, our time is precious, and we need to kind of, give everyone as equal weighting as possible. And so that needs to be considered as well.
You mentioned sort of NAB, and actually takes us into, I guess, looking at the themes for IBC this year. Just a quick reminder that the Q&A function is there, so please do submit questions and we'll come to them, I guess, after this next section. But in terms of, I guess, also, looking at briefings and how spokespeople can stand out when you're going back to back to back and maybe hearing the same thing, but also in terms of the big themes, thinking back to NAB, which is obviously still quite recent in the memory. Jake, what did maybe come out of that show that you think that's still going to be the big topic for me in September? Or maybe conversely, I didn't get enough of that out in Vegas that I thought we were going to get loads of, and I'd like to hear more about, sustainability or whatever. What were kind of the big things that maybe didn't come through as much in NAB that you want more of?
Yeah, I think NAB didn't seem to stand out in any particular way for themed stuff that you have in previous years. So it was lots of stuff. So it was difficult to sort of say it was an NAB about anything in particular. It had a mixture of, all the kind of usual stuff of 5G, cloud, a bit of AI, not as much of it as you might imagine. Generative stuff wasn't talked about an enormous amount. data and insights, little bit of virtual production. There was, definitely starting to come onto the showroom floor a bit. But there wasn't an overriding theme, I would say. But I would imagine IBC will have a lot of the AI generative, what it means for different bits of the industry, how it's being incorporated into, post-production, for example, and different disciplines there. And, continued stuff about cloud and virtual working. I think the virtual production stuff, we run a show ourselves, the Media Production Technology Show at Olympia, and that had a lot of virtual production. We had our own stage with lots of speakers talking on that as well. And there's a lot to talk about there, and there's definite moves into that space. So I expect there'll be some focus on that. And so I don't know. Was there more to that question? I can't remember. Or just
no.
Right.
Carry on, Jake. Carry on, Jake.
You
should be an analyst. You should be an analyst. Carry on.
We're not used to being the ones being asked the questions. That's the problem.
Yeah,
That's
exactly. Yeah.
Well, Paolo, maybe start with you as well in terms of big themes that you're most interested in looking at. I know you mentioned kind of thoughts about the industry in general, that kind of macro view about where the sector's going. What kind of stuff are you most hoping to hear from vendors, the big brands, when it comes to Amsterdam? What are kind of the trends that you're looking at, or are you just going to kind of wait and see what emerges?
Yeah, I guess it's a bit early to see exactly what specific vendors are going to be trying to brainwash us about for IBC. Don't forget, we've got some big things in the pipeline over the next 6 months. We've got Apple's WWDC that's happening next week. And of course, there's the eagerly anticipated, rumored VR, AR, mixed reality headset. That if that does get announced, I think there's going to be a lot of focus on that device. And over the last couple of years, as Jenny and Jake will know, VR, AR, mixed reality hasn't really featured heavily at many of these the media and broadcast shows. So that could be something that just suddenly gets, Apple's now in the game, if that is going to be the case, and that will reignite interest amongst the media and the broadcasters because of the fact that it's Apple. So all of a sudden, that could be our area. And then you get the AWSs, the Google Clouds, the Microsoft Azures, really heavily focused on that. And then that will certainly trickle down for some of the guys who look at the encoding, the coding, the harmonics, and all the other guys as well, looking at that as well. That could be potentially hot. And I think one area that will just continue to increase in prominence at shows is the whole notion around 5G, private 5G. And of course, I know that Jenny's covered some of the big events that have driven linear TV usage over the 6 to 12 months. And most recently, the King's coronation, that we saw the use of private 5G standalone as well in the UK. So I think that's, we're starting to see a lot more of these user cases emerging. So I expect that to be big. Obviously, with the shift and the ongoing shift towards IP, there has to be a greater focus on reducing the bandwidth, because obviously the networks are getting to a point where they're already getting congested with video is the wrecking ball effect for networks. So I think there's going to be a lot of focus on that. And I guess from an economic perspective, where's the money throughout the value chain and also in the consumer eyes? Is it all, there seems to be a gold rush towards fast channels, and I'm extremely skeptical about the rollout. And it's a conversation for another day, but I just don't believe in it for Europe. And I do a lot of travel in the US, and I'm not seeing anyone talk about fast TV channels on the high street. And many people I know in the US just leave their TVs on. And how can we make success of fast channels when it feels like the biggest genre is news? Anyway, I'm going to park it because I'm going to go and I don't want to monopolize the time.
Maybe that's the challenge.
But that's the challenge. It could be. But the only other point I would say, and this kind of dovetails nicely into some of the work that Jake is doing, there's a huge focus always on sport. Sport is, one of the few genres that really still generates a huge amount of value and attention. I know in the UK, we're coming into a period where we're going to have the Premier League rights auction, and there's a lot of interest. What's DAZN going to do? could TNT Sports, what's their appetite, firepower to maintain what they have? Could we see Apple? Is there scope to do an Apple MLS type of deal? So, and this is going to be replicated in other markets as well. And, obviously I'm here in the UAE, and Etisalat has now just dropped the be-in channels from their TV platform. So I think just sport just generates a huge buzz and excitement. And I think IBC, that again will dominate the conversations in terms of tech on the show floor, but also amongst the conference sessions as well. And, one area that we often don't tend to talk about, but I think they're doing a really good job. Certainly they did at NAB, and I'm sure it will continue at IBC, the whole notion around sustainability and, talking to what Jenny and Jake were saying about virtual production. We'll see a lot more of that, I suspect, at IBC as well. Now, sorry, over to you, Jenny.
Well, there's a few things that I would pick up on that. So FAST was a really big talking point at IBC 2022, and I was expecting to hear a lot about it at NAB, and I heard nothing. So that really surprised me. Nobody really talked to me about FAST at all. Whether that has now reached its peak, I don't know, but I'd be interested to see whether that becomes a topic, whether that is more of a topic now in Europe than it is in the US. I guess we'll see. In the weeks running up to NAB, it felt like all anybody was talking about was generative AI. And then when I got to the show, nobody was talking about generative AI. But I think that was possibly because it happened so close. This big explosion happened so close to the show. I'm intrigued to see where we are with that come IBC, or whether it needs to go another year and it will be NAB 2024. I want to hear more about sustainability, particularly from the vendors, because as Jake knows, we hear a lot from how productions are being more sustainable, and we hear about Albert and the great work that they're doing, and they've just released their first cohort of studios that have been given sustainability badges. But the vendors, I think, are so far behind where the industry is moving in terms of sustainability. I want to hear from them at IBC about what they're doing. There are a few I know that are doing it. There are a few that were talking about it last year, but let's really hear. That should be something that the vendors should really be zoning in on, because that's what their clients want to hear about. They want to hear that, I don't know, this new camera that they've launched, the casing for it is recycled, because then they can say, well, we're using thoroughly recycled cameras, that's an example, but you know what I mean. Or
yeah.
We've developed this power supply that uses salt, which I know Jake and I were writing about yesterday, that helps reduce production sustainability. The vendors need to catch up, I think, on that. So I'm really hoping to hear much more about that come IBC, and again NAB 2024, and just ongoing. I think that it has to become part of it has to become so routine that it isn't a talking point. It just is.
The norm.
Happens, yeah, the norm, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, last question before we hand it over to the audience, and it's actually kind of the inverse of that. Playing a bit of buzzword bingo. You've all kind of touched on, those briefings that it's just a sales pitch and there's waffle, or releases that are just full of jargon. Are there any terms that you just think, oh, you know what, I've heard enough of that, or that one's just lost all meaning to me? I walked around the show floor last year, and I know the theme was content everywhere, but I really felt like uniqueness was kind of nowhere. So what are kind of the buzzwords that you just think, no, I've had enough of that one, please do not use that term anymore? Thinking long and hard, because there's probably a few options to pick from.
Virtualization, automation, efficiency, or efficiencies.
Just without the context of how, just the words kind of chucked in.
Yeah, they're just chucked in because it feels right and they sound good. They're long in nature, and it feels to be, consistent with what everyone else is kind of talking about.
Companies saying that they're being sustainable, and then when you look at it properly, that technology actually isn't at all, because it's using more power or however it's done. I think, as I said, I want to hear more about sustainability, but I want to hear more about things that actually are sustainable, and not being that's not just a buzzword that people will throw in to say, oh, look at us, we're being sustainable.
Yeah. So let's talk about it, but make it genuine.
Yeah, and remote, I guess, again, that's something where people say, oh no, we're, you know, we've gone to the cloud and we're doing all of this. And, okay, but actually are you? And when you sort of dig deeper, you find that actually it's only percentage that's now in the cloud, or that it's something they want to do, but it's not quite there yet. I think, you know, be honest with us, because we're going to work it out anyway.
It's always a paradigm shift, isn't it? That's certainly a phrase I could do without.
My personal one's groundbreaking. That's the one.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's similar. Yeah.
Cool. Well, we've had a couple of questions come in from the audience. We'll just open these up, and anyone that wants to jump in, by all means, feel free. First one, perhaps a little bit shorter, and you guys have touched on this a little bit, but how many vendor briefings do you typically take during the show? Jenny, I know you mentioned you're kind of back to back, but what does that actually look like in terms of a number that you might book during the show?
Because it tends to be, I think if anyone that reads TV Europe knows pretty much that I'm the main editorial person. So everybody wants to see me, which is lovely. And I will see as many companies as I can. So that can be getting on to around 40 across the show. Probably, depending on when I arrive and what I'm doing. Some days I can't, you know, most days I'll start as early as I can and go as long as I can. But it also depends if you're writing and if you're releasing a major piece of news at 8:00 in the morning and I've now got to write it for our website, then that's going to not help me get on the show floor as early as possible. So, but yeah, it can be something around about 40. I always apologise to the last people. That at IBC 2022, my last briefing on, I think it was the Sunday, because I came home on the Monday, or attempted to come home on the Monday, like everybody. They had booked me in for an interview with the CEO without actually telling me, and I've still, when I saw the same company at NAB, I apologised again for the fact that my brain was such mush that I wasn't able to do a proper interview with that person. So yeah, it is pretty much back to back for me, including all the running around as well.
So maybe advice for vendors to have good coffee on the stand then, if they're...
Yes, please. Yes.
And
water and snacks.
That is a very good one. Yes.
Yeah.
Coffee, definitely. Yeah.
Hello, Jake. What's your kind of, you know, does 40 sort of sound right for you? Maybe slightly more, slightly less? How many do you guys typically look to book in?
Well, in terms of bookings for me, I would say a lot less than Jenny. But in terms of companies, I actually see way more than 40 because, you know, I do go around the entire show floor, all of the halls, and I stop off and make a point. The companies that appeal to me based on what I see, I will spend 5 minutes just to get a sense of who they are, what they do, and provide a little bit of color. And then I can always have a conversation with them at a later date. So yeah, I could end up seeing hundreds of companies, but you know, the time I would spend with them is literally say 5 or 10 minutes, and it's very much kind of sporadic, ad hoc.
Yeah, for us it isn't ad hoc. It's booked in. Everything's booked in advance, and I try and start each time, every show, with, okay, I'm going to book on the hour. I'm not going to do any more than that. So we're going for 3 days. You know, it's roughly starts at 9, roughly finishes at 6, and meetings on the hour. But inevitably, that never really happens, and you always end up like with days where it's every half hour, or you get like 3 or 4 hours where it's every half hour, and then you might have a little bit of time where it's every hour. And in the past, it's often just been me going around editorially, but we've in the last couple of shows ramped up a little bit, and there's a couple of us editorially going around meeting people. So yeah, we can maybe do up to double what Jenny said, just because there's 2 of us. But if it's just an individual, it's around the same sort of amount. I think we're probably putting the same amount of meetings in our diaries by the sounds of it, Jenny.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
We've had a kind of a related question come in, really, and I guess going back to what we were saying right at the top of the hour about getting news sort of organized in advance and making sure you guys are aware of it with embargoes, would you say that, you know, given there's so much competition, is it actually a good idea to try and organize briefings ahead of the show or the week after the show instead of during that weekend itself?
If you want to see me on the show floor, you need to book me as early as possible, because you know, I've had so many PR people that have waited until the week of the show and say, right, when can we see you? And I've had to say, I'm really sorry, but I don't have any time left. you know, I will be really honest. I do prioritize companies that support TBB Europe. I have to, because like we said, it's just me, and I want to see the people that I know will do support us. It is a two-way, you know, the industry needs to remember it is a two-way thing. As much as vendors want support, they need to support the trade press, because otherwise you're not going to have a trade press for much longer. So that is for me, whether it is, I do prioritize companies that do support TBB Europe. And even then, I still can't see everybody. There are people at NAB that I weren't able to see, and that I will try and see at IBC because of the fact I couldn't see them at NAB. But yeah,
Jenny, Jake, just out of curiosity, in the telco world, and particularly more so in the tech world, we as analysts get pre-briefed on a lot of stuff, and we tend to get engaged as a big group of analysts. So a particular vendor or telco could brief us, say, even 2 weeks, you know, in the run up to MWC, the busiest time of MWC is those 2 or 3 weeks before MWC, where we're almost back to back in pre-briefs for various things. Does that happen in, I don't see it. It should happen a lot more in media and broadcast, but it doesn't.
It doesn't. There are a few companies that have started to realise that that's the best way to get hold of me, in that sort of 2 weeks prior to having sent off the show issue to the printers, and before I get on the show floor. That's a brilliant time to get hold of me and do a pre-briefing, and then allow it, and sort of saying to me, okay, we've seen you now. You don't have to come and see us at the show. And I'm, you know, I'm focused. I know what I'm talking about. They've got me individually. There's nobody running around trying to drag off the person that I'm trying to talk to, or trying to drag me off to do something. So that actually, I think, is a really great idea, and I wish more companies were doing that.
Yeah, you get a bit of it, don't you? But not a lot. I think, you know, maybe they feel like if they did it a week prior to the show, you wouldn't then get involved in the show coverage, which is probably seen as quite important. So I guess there's pros and cons from their point of view, but it's much more likely to get you, you know, proper space with the journalist to, you know, and then get coverage.
Yeah.
And sorry to ask the question, that,
you know,
I was going to say, for you, Jenny, and for you, Jake, would you prefer, if there was some form of a pre-brief, would you prefer it just to be journalists only, or you'd be happy to be grouped with analysts?
Yeah, no problem.
I've done plenty of those with analysts. So and sometimes, you know, analysts often come up with a really interesting question that I've not even thought about. So yeah, it's you know, hopefully also we come up with interesting questions that you've not thought about as well. So yeah, I have no problem with that.
Another question we've had, more related to those at-show briefings. Is it important that the company representatives you meet with have opinions about wider developments and trends within the industry? We spoke about generative AI, or are you just happy for them to speak about their own company development? So do you want them to give you kind of quotes on those broader trends, or just kind of stay in their lane of what that business is doing? Maybe a mix of the two.
I think it's more interesting if they have opinions about the trends. You know, we're always going to write about it, even if it's not specifically at the show coverage, then, you know, following it, you know, even if it's to you know, help think about what, you know, feature might be in the next print issue of whatever we're doing. So, and then you think, oh, that guy had some interesting stuff to say. I'll probably go back and get a quote from them. So, you know, that I don't think it hurts to have opinions about, you know, broader stuff outside of the specific product or service or software, whatever you're promoting at a show.
Yeah, I'm quite bad that somebody will say something to me and that will go, oh, that's a thought leadership, and it's immediately scribbled down. And then when I get back home, I then follow up with the published, you know, PR company or in-house and say, so-and-so said that sentence, and I thought that was really interesting, and what do you think? And that's one of the great things that I love about NAB and IBC. Does some of my work for me for the next few issues and for online as well. It really helps. So yeah, I'm more than happy for people to sort of talk. You know, obviously I'm there to talk to them. They have a job to do to tell me about their product, and that's, I totally understand that. But within the conversation, I'm more than happy to talk about the wider trends going on in the industry.
I think it validates what that company is doing, and they've understood where the market opportunity is. So I think in that context, and when you're looking at the competitive landscape, for me as the analyst, it's paramount. I know for Jenny and Jake, they have so many words they need to include into an article. So it's hard to perhaps tell that story, or maybe they can allude to a line. But certainly for me as the analyst, in the context of the landscape, it shows that the company's really thought through where they need to go.
Brilliant.
I am.
Sorry, go ahead, Jenny.
Just going to say, coming back from NAB for the first time ever, and this was actually, I was prompted to do this because somebody on this course sent me his thoughts that he'd posted on LinkedIn about NAB, and I thought, oh, maybe it's time that I actually did that for the first time ever, 6 years in the job. I thought, I know, I'll write a piece about what I thought about NAB. It's big things for me. And it was one of the most popular articles that I published that week. It was incredibly, and you know, I'm always very honest and say I don't have a technology background. I know I've been doing this job for 6 years, but actually I am a journalist at heart. I'm not a TV technology person at heart. And so I was really surprised, and I think that's definitely something I will do in future. And I like to try and cover these shows. Once it's all done and we're back home, think of different ways that we can tell, because we have to remember, Jake and I particularly, not everybody that reads what we write goes to those shows, particularly NAB. So how can we bring those readers and make them part of the discussion? And so, yes, one of the things that I did this year was write about my thoughts. And the other thing I did was a little video of some of the cool tech that I saw while I was running around the show floor. And that wasn't from briefings. Some of it was from briefings, but some of it was just running around and seeing this cool old film tape machine cleaning tape. And I just thought, that's really interesting. Or, oh, look, this very big, well-known tech vendor is doing something. I'm going to take a little video of that. And we'll put them on social media. We created a little video, a 1.5 minute long video of cool stuff. And those again have been really, really popular. So I'm always trying to think of different ways to bring all of the readership to the trade show and not just the people that are at the trade show.
For sure. It's normally the robot bartenders that catch my attention, Jenny.
Video of that next time. That's what I'll get. I'll get you being served by a robot bartender.
Sounds like a plan. I know we're coming close to the top of the hour, but one last question from me. I know just as we were setting up and before our attendees joined the line, we were talking about the future of these shows and whether we're going to see more vendors, less vendors this year. In a sentence, why are they still valuable to you guys? Why do you still go to these in-person events, and why would you hope to see the prominent brands in the space still going to them?
It's a straightforward way of getting the news from so many different vendors and to find out trends as well. So it's quick and easy.
To get excited about what's being shown, to get inspired for the next few issues or whatever I'm doing online, and also to see colleagues. We spend, we're such a fractured industry now because so many of us work from home. We don't see the people that we talk to for a lot of the year. So it's lovely when I'm running around a show. I bump into Paolo nearly constantly when I'm at shows, and that's probably the only time we actually see one another face to face talking. Yeah. That's fantastic. So so it's still a great place for connecting with industry colleagues, and I think that's really key for any trade show. I will just say that it's very interesting that at the start of the pandemic we were all saying, oh, vendors have found new ways to talk about what they're doing. They found new ways of connecting with their customers that's not necessarily a trade show, and we'll all do this post-pandemic. And then we've gone to IBC and NAB and everybody's gone like, no, we've got to have a stand at that trade show, we've got to be back at the trade show. So there was lots of talk, but we've just gone back to the way things are, really.
Just to echo what Jenny and Jake said, in complete agreement. We know each other so well. There's that mutual respect. We're happy to engage and help and support one another, and I think that doesn't transcend to the wider community, and that's a shame that there is a disconnect on that. There's still a huge value in the trade shows, of course, from a networking perspective, but I think moving forward, IBC and NAB are going to be different shows to what we've seen in the past. Some companies are clearly going to be cutting back, scaling back their own efforts. There's just simply too many companies chasing too few dollars. And so unfortunately, you know, as we've seen in other verticals, in other industries, there's a lot of consolidation happening as well. But it's just the very nature of the world that we're living in. Sorry to put such a downbeat, but it's the harsh reality and someone has to say it. Yeah, but it's a great place to at least see everyone in one place. And I think that's important, you know, and it's just nice to be able to all reconnect anyway.
Exactly. Well, no, and sometimes, like you said, Paolo, the tough truth needs to be said. But that does bring us to the top of the hour. So thanks so much to all three of you for joining. Hopefully, our attendees have found this really useful. If it has kind of inspired you to think about your comms and marketing plan in the lead up to IBC, us here at Babel would love to help you out. But if you are heading out there to the show in Amsterdam, all I can say is that I hope you don't get stuck in all the airport chaos like last year.
Not again.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Take care. Safe travels.
Yeah.